Hey guys, John Lex here, back with our, well, Manny's here with me today. We're gonna react to the mostly complete lore of Hollow Knight. This is, I guess, part 2. This is from right about where you're seeing. Oh, are you getting tired? You getting tired, my cat? Okay, well, I mean, you can stop if you want. You don't want to? You want to? Oh, you're collapsing in a jelly. Oh no. All right, let's. See, this is what you don't see generally when. Okay, that hurts actually a little bit. Your biscuits, the biscuits are done, Manny. They're done. Oh my gosh. Okay. Can you? All right. What are we doing? You're adjusting your booty. Oh, I know. I love you too. Okay. Oh, here. What do you want to do? Let's do well, let's start, I guess. Oh, okay. Oh, wow, that was smooth. You like kind of got to your feet and then laid down in my lap. That's really clever. That's good. All right, so last time we left off, we started with the infection appears, or we stopped right at this point. And let's whoa, excuse me. Let's resume.
A mysterious substance known as the Void. This ancient caste once also tried to lay claim to the entire land of Hallownest, but they too failed.
Was there any
In his quest to conquer all of Hallownest, the Pale King had made an enemy long forgotten.
There must have been
an enemy that was about to be remembered.
Something about this, right?
I mentioned earlier that the Moth tribe entirely forgot about the Radiance in order to worship the Pale King, but that isn't quite true.
Right.
Memories of her still lingered, and hushed whispers of faith kept the Radiance alive. At the summit of the Crystal Peak, a location known as Hallownest Crown, a strange collection of glyphs can be found. Joining these glyphs is a statue of the Radiance, presiding over the kingdom below. This old summit is the sole standing shrine left to the Radiance. This was built in order to keep the memory of the Radiance alive. The Radiance's light began to appear in the dreams of Hallownest citizens. This light manifested itself in an infection that ravaged through the kingdom's tunnels. Those infected would fall into a deep sleep and awaken with broken minds. Some of the lesser bugs tried to resist the Radiance's light, which only resulted in them being consumed by it even more so. Many infected bugs lost their wills and began attacking bugs that weren't infected. The infection also twisted the bodies of its hosts, causing them to bloat and occasionally develop orange cysts on their bodies.
Right, that's the other thing, whereas something important to realize is it's not just a mental illness. It is a physical presence as well. Like, it physically manifests in the world, and not just within living creatures. Like, it grows from the ground itself, which is, at least to me, that suggests that it's not. What are you looking at there, Manny? It suggests to me that it's not like entirely, when it's said or believed that the Pale King created all this stuff, to me that maybe that's not entirely wrong, right? Maybe there's some truth to that, because if that were to be the case, why would the infection, like, why are boils coming out of the ground? That doesn't make any sense. Anyway.
For many victims, they were reverted back to their basic instincts, carrying out the duties they once fulfilled in life, but now as mindless slaves. Those caught up in the infection were linked into the Radiance's hive mind, allowing her to control their bodies if needed. As the infection spread across Hallownest, many groups looked to solutions.
Into the Radiance's hive mind. I don't know that there was necessarily a hive mind. Do we ever have something that says that the Radiance was controlling people?
To fight off the Radiance's light. The gates to the City of Tears were closed in an attempt to keep the infection from reaching the city. The stagways were also shut down at some point, and many of the stags eventually died out. but some took more proactive efforts against the infection. The scholars of the Soul Sanctum decided to harness the power of Soul in an attempt to fight the infection. This resulted in...
Oh, that thing that was strapped to the table was one of the shell-headed things. I didn't realize this before. But I thought the whole point of the Soul Sanctum was to grant immortality, not... It's like Aldia's Keep. It's not necessarily to fight the infection, but to... You know, some other, like, more nefarious purpose.
The deaths of hundreds of bugs, whose souls were sucked out and injected into the bodies of the scholars. Their goal was to achieve some kind of pure focus, which would somehow protect them from plagues of the mind. The scholars' leader, the Soul Master, was driven mad by the sheer power of Soul, and his entire sect failed to avoid infection. But hey, at least they took as many innocent people down with them as they could. The Mantis tribe, showing a stronger will than the common bug, were able to stave off the infection. However, one of the 4 Mantis Lords turned against his sisters. He and his followers took in the infection willingly, as it gave them more strength and courage. At some point during all this, the Traitor Lord and his followers were exiled from the Mantis village, eventually taking up residence in the Queen's Gardens.
I mean, it's great, but I'd really like some proof. I have a feeling this whole video is going to be like this, where they're just like, this is what happened. It's like, how do you know? I want you to lead me through your deductive process, but like I said, it's fine. I'll probably disagree just because I'm an asshole, but, you know, I'm fine with the thing is, it's all interpretation, right? Like, you could watch, what is it? What's that movie with Patrick Bateman as the character? American Psycho. There's the movie and there's the book. I've watched the movie, read the book. To me, the movie is... At the end of the end of the movie is one thing, and the end of the book is something different, and it's opposite. Excuse me. But I've talked to people that they're like, no, the end of the movie is the other way, and the end of the book is different. So, like, my interpretation, end of movie is A, end of book is B, and they're like, no, end of movie is B, end of book is A. So there might be some interpretation involved, and that's fine.
The Traitor Lord's daughter ended up dying at some point.
I didn't see this. Wherever this is, I didn't see this thing.
This is the same Mantis that was in a relationship with Zamir, one of the 5 Great Knights.
Which is where I was trying to go. How did I figure this out?
But the Mantises rejected their union because of Zamir's outsideness. As a gamer, this type of prejudice is all too familiar.
Who's this loser? Is it? Is this one of the Hollow Knight devs, or is this the main, or is this mossbag? That's why I chose that word. I was like, who's this? You know, whatever. And why does Sonic have a bottle of pills? Doki Doki Literature Club is pretty great, though, all things considered.
And honestly,
also, GameCube, just as a side note, the GameCube controller is probably the most comfortable controller I have ever used. I don't know how Nintendo did it, but they did it. It is amazing.
It makes me sick.
Gamers rise up, yeah.
With the 5 Great Knights completely useless to fight against the infection, the Pale King devised his own scheme. A scheme involving a strange substance known as Void.
Where was this room? Did we find this? Are all these from the DLC, or are they just like all areas that I didn't find?
As I mentioned earlier, the Pale King's White Palace was built in an area called the Ancient Basin, but his castle wasn't the only noteworthy thing down there. At the bottom of the Ancient Basin was the entrance to a pit known as the Abyss. Within the Abyss was a lake composed of void. The Pale King realized that this void could be given form, as evidenced by an imprint of such deep within the Abyss, possibly left there by the ancient civilization that predated Hallownest. The Pale King devised a workshop in his palace, where he placed void in armor shells imbued with soul.
That's where this room was? Man, I don't know. I'm gonna have to, like... My god, how much did I miss? Like, realistically, how much did I actually miss? You know? Like, it's not just, like, map squares, you know what I mean? It's like... Someone mentioned during, like, in a comment that you have to have the shroom spore charm equipped in order to read the mushroom lore stones, which is like such a great detail, you know? And it's like, how do you know? Like, what do you do with that?
Creating servants known as King's Molds and Wing Molds.
Oh.
These void creatures were somehow imprinted with the desire of the Pale King, so that they would serve him. It isn't clear when the Pale King started making these creatures. There is evidence to imply that even common bugs were aware of King's Molds, but the
That was the nailsmith. Why did he have a little statue or a little doll or something right there?
point is, the Pale King turned to the void in order to create another creature, one that he believed could contain the Radiance and her infection. He tried to create a pure vessel.
Right, so the fact that the Hollow Knight, there's a statue, means that presumably the infection had been growing for some time, right? It's not just like all of a sudden one day it appeared and this and this and that. It's like it had to occur over years, right? Slowly. Enough that people were concerned and the king was like, oh my god, look at this. Look, this is the cure. This is the solution to all of our problems. And there's statues built and whole areas constructed. You know, the Temple of the Black Egg, like the whole point of that was, you know, to contain the Hollow Knight. Why there, though, if the infection is like a physical presence? I don't know.
The Radiance's infection needs its host to have a will and a mind in order to enslave it. A pure vessel would be a creature made of void designed to lack those features. The Pale King believed that by harnessing the void inside a pure vessel, he would be able to stop the infection and keep Hallownest lasting eternal. But his method for creating this so-called pure vessel was incredibly cruel. This is where the White Lady and her King Kong-sized libido come into play. These two higher beings engaged in a union of some kind, resulting in the creation of several eggs that were dropped down into the abyss. There, the void seeped into these eggs, corrupting the offspring.
I wouldn't say seeped in. It clearly looks like there's some sort of apparatus attached to it. You can't see it here. So there's the egg and there's my stupid picture. Let me take my camera away for a second. I mean, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, but see, there you go. There's like crap.
Spring of the Pale.
Right here, there's the, I don't know, it looks like tentacles or something. Or not tentacles as much as like tubes coming from the walls and being like stuffed into the egg. I guess. I don't know. I'm back. I'm alive. Yeah, it looks deliberate. It's not, it doesn't look it's not like, oh, we'll drop the egg down there, and if it happens, it happens. It's like, no, no, no. They were placed here, and specifically, a hose was attached to the wall and then attached to the egg.
King and the White Lady. This act resulted in the creation of the vessels.
What is this? Where is this from? Is this DLC? Man, I'm gonna ask this every time I see something I don't know.
The vessels are not technically considered to be alive. They are shells created from the Pale King and White Lady that have been filled with a void. Within each vessel is a shade, a completely void being hidden behind the face of the vessel. Vessels are also non-gendered, I guess because they're dead or something. I'm not sure if that's how that works, but whatever. I'm not an expert on these kinds of things.
I think it's more that they might be non-gendered. In Hornet, Hornet was referred to as the gendered child, right? Something like that. Like us as a race of gendered beings, right? Male or female. It's entirely possible that, I mean, they breed from eggs, and it doesn't necessarily have to. They might be hermaphroditic, for example. They might possess like every creature might possess the ability to lay eggs and need DNA or something from another member of the species. Not, I mean, that's kind of a pun, I guess, another member, but regardless, that wasn't intentional, but the you know what I mean? Like, so the king might be able to lay eggs, and and so Hornet being like, oh my god, you're only able to lay eggs, you can't fertilize eggs, like that would be weird. You know what I mean? Whereas the normal, like every creature is capable of both laying eggs and fertilizing eggs. It was, my interpretation is that one is more correct. It's not necessarily true that there's only one gender, generally speaking, in Hallownest, but it seems like it's something more along that line. Anyway.
I don't work at ICE anymore. Thousands of
What does ICE have to do with it? I know it's a joke. That's the joke.
vessels were created during this process, but only one was chosen as the pure vessel. This particular vessel, chosen by the Pale King,
I don't think it had to do with choice. My impression is that this was the only successful one.
was deemed the Hollow Knight and was taken away to the White Palace. But I want to take a bit of a closer look at this part of the story. There are a number of questions and theories surrounding this moment that I really want to dig into. The big question surrounding this moment is, why was the Hollow Knight chosen over any other vessel? One common theory is that the Pale King took these vessels back to the White Palace and evaluated them using his giant collection of buzzsaws. This theory is probably the least likely explanation.
I'm actually not certain the pale or this thing was real, because it's within a dream. Or not actually real as in that's what was actually in the palace. It's entirely possible that it's a dream, right? So it's like, they're like, oh well, we're testing you or something. Like it might be more figurative than literal, but since you're in the dream, it's literal, if that makes any kind of sense.
It kinda exists just to explain the buzzsaws, which is quite the mystery, I'll admit, but doesn't really mesh with the vessels very well. How does being good at Super Meat Boy prove that you are a worthy vessel? And while thinking about logistics in a game about magic bugs is never a good idea, How exactly did the Pale King transfer these thousands of vessels to his palace without characters like the Dung Defender finding out? So this means that the Pale King probably made his decision without taking any of the vessels out of the Abyss.
How? It says so there were others. Did I... What happens if you go back to the Dung Defender? Is he there again?
So how did the Pale King make his evaluation? I think the best explanation comes from a theory I originally heard from a user named Golden Flower Fan. Basically, the vessels were hatched down at the bottom of the Abyss, and the first one to make it to the top was chosen by the Pale King.
I don't know. You see them falling. Do you see them falling? You see them as having fallen. Past tense, like they've already fallen. I don't think that's true, though. I don't think it's the first one. Like I said, I think the Hollow Knight was the only successful one, and we were the runt, so to speak. You know, we were the solid snake to the liquid snake, or we were Cloud as opposed to Sephiroth or something.
In a memory of this event, we see vessels falling from above.
We do see them falling, that's right.
Back down into the pit of the Abyss. Perhaps these vessels weren't being cast down into the Abyss, but fell while trying to escape out of it.
I don't know. I mean, I think they were being cast down because it talked about the refuse. Right, like the garbage was being cast and sealed away.
The lore tablet
Which would be like another Hollow Knight, another failure.
outside the Abyss appears to support this theory. It reads, "Our pure vessel has ascended. Beyond lies only the refuse and regret of its creation. We shall enter that place no longer." This tablet was likely written right after the Hollow Knight was chosen, considering that is when the entrance to the Abyss was sealed off. The tablet proclaims that the pure vessel has ascended, or in other words, climbed out of the Abyss.
Or, I assumed it was this one was successful. This was a success, right? Not that it got out of the Abyss, but that it was able, it survived, or I think it was more figurative instead of literal.
And while cut content should never be considered canon, I would just like to point out that an earlier version of this tablet, found in the game's code, was even more explicit about this. It read, "From below, our pure vessel has ascended."
I mean, sure, there's Jack. That doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't mean they literally climbed up. Although, I mean, they had to, right? But it doesn't mean that that was the test. From below is like they're made from void, or they were created below. Anyway.
But how does making it to the top of the Abyss first prove that the Hollow Knight is somehow a perfectly hollow vessel?
Correct.
Well, I think this whole concept might just be a
Where
misconception. What if the Hollow Knight wasn't any different from the other vessels? All the vessels were made in the exact same way after all. The idea that the Hollow Knight was somehow more hollow than the other vessels comes from the fact that there were so many vessels created in the first place.
Again, where is this? Did we see this? This has to be somewhere in the game, I would imagine.
If they only needed one, then why create so goddamn many? I mean, this is like Octomom on steroids. Well, these are bugs we're talking about, so it would make sense that multiple offspring would come from one egg. And it might have been a precaution to produce multiple vessels in hopes that at least one would be able to successfully escape the Abyss. Now, another explanation could be that the Pale King just yeeted other vessels that made it to the top first, after determining that they weren't hollow, which would better explain why so many were created. Ultimately, the exact details aren't super important, but I do find it interesting how many different interpretations can be pulled from this part of the lore.
Right.
After the Hollow Knight was chosen, the Pale King sealed the doorway to the Abyss, leaving the discarded vessels to rot away in darkness. These actions were not taken lightly by the Pale King or the White Lady. Both participants expressed shame in what they did, but saw no other option to save the kingdom. But the vessels weren't the only poor saps sealed away in the Abyss. There's also a lighthouse that was built on top of a naturally formed spire, its light shining down on an ocean of abyss below. Inside was one of the Pale King's royal retainers, who was left in charge of keeping the lighthouse turned on. So this brave soul was willingly sealed in a dark and dangerous tomb for the rest of his life, just so he could not pull a lever. Well, at least he was living with purpose. With the Abyss sealed and the Hollow Knight chosen, the Pale King's plan was beginning to come together. The Hollow Knight was raised and trained to prime form, causing it to grow several times its original size. We don't know exactly why this happened, but I guess the Hollow Knight is just a grower and not a shower. We know that the Hollow Knight was trained to use a nail.
What is this? This is probably some of the DLC. My God, how many times have I said that now? That's a great point. The Hollow Knight was trained. Although, maybe.
But why was this even necessary? One possible explanation is that the Hollow Knight needed to protect itself in case an intruder tried to kill it. You know, like the player.
I don't know if that's correct. Because the Hollow Knight is under the control of the Radiant at this point. Right? Like it's the seal that's holding back the Radiant. Plus, the Hollow Knight's eyes are orange. It's infected. It's, you know. And also it activates, or it comes to life when we start the game. Like when we come to Hallownest, that's when it wakes up. You want to get in my lap, Manny? You're back over there. You're back over that way.
Or perhaps this was important in the process of containing the Radiance. Unfortunately, the details of that are never fully explained. The Hollow Knight might have somehow focused the Radiance inside itself, but Team Cherry gives us no explanation of how that might have worked. But that still wasn't enough for the Pale King. Additional seals were needed in order to protect the Hollow Knight's physical body while the Radiance was trapped inside of it. To achieve this, the Pale King sought the help of 3 particular bugs, who would later be known as the Dreamers: Lurien the Watcher, Motomon the Teacher, and Hera the Beast. Lurien is definitely the most mysterious of the 3 Dreamers. He lived in the Watcher's Spire in the City of Tears. From there, Lurien watched over the city with his telescope. Lurien was a pretty big fan of the king, so it probably took little convincing for him to lie down for him. Lurien might also be tied to another strange incident that occurred in the City of Tears. Hidden on some of Lurien's lore tablets are images of jars, the same jars that can be found stockpiled in the Tower of Love. This building sits on the outskirts of the city, and is the setting of one of the most bizarre bosses in the game, the Collector. The Collector is a void construct that appears to have been made from the same mold used to create the King's molds.
Interesting.
But the Collector is unique because, well,
Good grief, he's naked!
The Collector stayed in the Tower of Love with a noble bug who likely owned the establishment. In the tower, a number of bugs can be found captured in jars, implying that these two were tasked with collecting these creatures. However, the Collector somehow became obsessed with grubs, creating a map to keep track of grubs it captured in jars, as well as keeping a strange shrine displaying a grub in the style of the Vitruvian Man.
Yes. Also, it showed a couple times in this video, which it's a room I never saw, the one that shows the mold. There's like the lore tablet that has what looks to be this pattern on it. just without the grub.
Eventually, the bug staying with the collector decided to lock it inside the Tower of Love, and fled to the Queen's Gardens, where it died, likely due to overexposure to the void. Despite being locked up in the tower, the collector is still spotted by the hunter at some point, which either means this only happened recently, or the hunter has been farting around in Hallownest for a long ass time.
I don't know. I mean, I think the hunter is you probably get this when you complete the hunter's journal. The hunter's journal, when you complete it like 100%, you probably meet it. Maybe even fight it. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's just they might not be like super autistic detail about everything. It's entirely possible they just made a mistake, or, you know, weren't paying complete attention, or, you know, things get forgotten. It happens. Or maybe they're right. Maybe they left it on purpose. I don't know.
We have no idea what these creatures were trying to do. It's implied that the collector was trying to preserve the creatures of Hallownest, perhaps trying to protect them from the spread of the infection, but we don't know where the collector's obsession with grubs originated, and while Lurian does seem connected to all of this, we don't know how involved he was with this operation, or what its end goal exactly was. Motomon the teacher lived in the teacher's archives, a library built atop a lake of acid in the Fog Canyon. The lower half of her body consists of tentacles, making her a popular subject for the thriving Hollow Knight R34 community. The archives.
Why? And also, why was Garfield in there? I don't want to know. I assume Monomon the teacher had something to do with the jellyfish, though. Like, Monomon was probably the leader of the jellyfish or something.
Fog Canyon as a whole are also filled with these strange Metroid knockoffs. These creatures are likely related to Monomon in some way.
Yeah, there you go.
They could be her live offspring, her test tube babies, or possibly even her shit. Motomon uses futuristic cathode ray tube things to store information about Hallownest.
Also, the ghosts that you're seeing here have little tentacles and stuff. I just thought I'd point that out.
Several terminals in the teacher's archive go into detail about the Pale King's plan to defeat the Radiants, indicating that Motomon had intimate knowledge of what she was taking part in. Finally, the Pale King sought the help of Hera the Beast, the Queen of Deepnest. Now, as I mentioned earlier, relations between Hallownest and Deepnest were kinda not great. Unlike the other two dreamers, Hera needed to be convinced in order to help the Pale King. Hera would eventually agree to become a dreamer, in exchange for a child. The Pale King agreed, and the two engaged in a dalliance, which is a fancy way of saying they totally boned. The White Lady was okay with this arrangement. In fact, she might have been watching from the closet. The motive behind Hera's request is never elaborated on, but it appears as though the King of Deepnest was dead at this point.
Do we know that Hera made the request? Was there even a king? I mean, I assume you think spider, you think female. Just that's how it goes.
Hera was a common bug, so perhaps she desired the Pale King's pale seed so that her child could be of high birth.
Was she a commoner? It's not the impression I get.
The bargain between Hera and the Pale King resulted in the birth of Hornet. She became known as the gendered child, because unlike the Pale King's other children, Hornet was not hollowed out by the Abyss. Hera and Hornet spent little time together, as Hera had to make good on her end of the bargain. And so the three dreamers were put to rest. Through their actions, a seal was placed over the black egg, prohibiting entrance into the chamber. These dreamers also had their own protection. At the base of Lurian's spire, the Watcher Knights guarded access to their master's body. Motomon's body was protected by a giant jellyfish named Umu. On top of this, Motomon entrusted her servant Quirrell with a mask which would be required to break an additional seal she had placed over herself. So she basically is double wrapping herself. As for Hera, we're not really sure what protected her. since it is never actually seen in-game. We don't know where this creature is hiding, but whoever it is, they really suck at their job. Now there appears to be one more element to the Pale King's plan.
What's protecting Hera? I mean, it's Deep Nest itself, right? Do you need a specific guardian?
Involving the Weavers. Hidden away in the Weaver's Den is an incomplete seal of binding, woven from silk. This design prominently features the Hollow Knight's head, and can be found in the White Palace, as well as blocking the exit during the Hollow Knight fight. Silk spools created by the Weavers can be found in the Stag Station in Deep Nest, as well as the Stag Station next to the White Palace. These spools can also be found in the Pale King's workshop. We know that the Weavers were closely tied to Hera and Hornet, so their actions might have been a part of the deal between the Pale King and Hera. Once the Hollow Knight was ready, the Radiance was somehow channeled into the vessel, which was then placed inside of a giant black egg located in the Forgotten Crossroads. This egg was built to sustain the Hollow Knight, and itself appears to be fashioned from void.
Yeah, what's her name? Said something like that, like... And not just that, but to kill anyone that goes in there. Like, so you can only have another Hollow Knight, but... Yeah, I mean, it was... It's weird, because the impression I got was that, kind of like Dark Souls, with kindling the flame, it's like, it's something that needs to be repeated, right? Another Hollow Knight is birthed, and then sacrifices itself and, seals it again until such time as a new one arrives. But who knows?
The Hollow Knight was chained up, and the entrance to the Black Egg was locked behind a powerful seal created by the Three Dreamers.
The other thing is, when it shows... Does it show chains wrapping around us? When we do the... If we ignore Hornet and just whack away at it. Yeah, I think... But we don't grow. That's the point. Like, we don't become that big.
Initially, this convoluted plan actually worked, and the infection was successfully contained. Memorials to the Hollow Knight and the Dreamers were erected in the City of Tears and the Resting Grounds. But this is the part of the story where things get a little bit hazy. By the time these statues were constructed, citizens had taken to writing on parchment woven from spider silk, which was all destroyed when water started pouring down onto the city. We don't know how long the Hollow Knight was able to completely contain the infection. Bugs from Dirtmouth used to go to the Temple of the Black Egg to pray, saying they felt at peace within the walls. But after a while, they stopped going, perhaps indicating that the infection was beginning to leak out again. The infectious air continued to seep through Hallownest for years, eventually even reaching the deepest parts of the kingdom. As it turns out, the Pale King's pure vessel wasn't quite so pure after all. The Hollow Knight had been tarnished by an idea instilled. While the game never explicitly tells us what that idea was, it does hint strongly at what it might be. Hidden away in the White Palace is a memory showing the Hollow Knight and the Pale King sharing a moment. The Hollow Knight might have developed a parental bond to the Pale King, and who could blame it? The Pale King is a pretty great dad after all. You know, if you ignore the infanticide and everything. Remember those smug mushroom dickheads? Well, it turns out their trust in the Pale King was a complete mistake. That shared mind isn't looking too good now, is it? In the fungal core, the corpse of a giant mushroom lies dormant. Its final thoughts were, "Pale worm, what good to see a demise unavoidable?" This could imply that the Pale King always knew that his kingdom was doomed.
Right.
All he could do was delay the inevitable.
No, that's why I think it's Dr. Manhattan, because of that. Or he could see the future. Well, I mean, that's screwed up enough, because if he could see the future, really, then he would know that the first Hollow Knight he chose was flawed, but that there would be another one. Like maybe he didn't see the little guy, our little guy, like hanging on the ledge behind. Still doesn't explain how we get from there to outside of the town, but regardless. You know, it's one of those things. It's like, well, I'm going to die and everything's going to ruin, but I'm also going to prepare for it. You know, so it's...
This is likely the moment when Hallownest as it once was entirely collapsed. The Hollow Knight had not completely stopped the infection, and while it may have taken a while, Hallownest was eventually brought low.
You know, that is a good point. Those guys, even before you defeat any of the Dreamers, they're infected still.
It's at this point that characters and areas begin to resemble as we know them in-game. When it became clear that the Hollow Knight was not able to contain the Radiance, the Pale King resorted to his final plan. He fucked off, hiding himself, his White Palace, and his Pale Court in the Dream World. At this point, all of the furniture in the palace was covered under white sheets, similar to how people in the real world cover their furniture while away on long trips. The palace was also completely covered with thorns and buzzsaws, similar to how people in the real world cover their houses with thorns and buzzsaws.
Sure.
The Pale King would eventually pass away while sitting on his throne in the White Palace. There's no confirmation on what killed him, but there are a few things to consider. The throne room is incredibly dark compared to the rest of the palace, and the particle effects and ambient track in this room are identical to that of the Abyss.
Oh, neat, okay.
All of the King's molds surrounding the Pale King are dead. The ancient basin itself also has become stained with the presence of void, as it can be seen as high as the rundown elevator shaft leading back to the city. Remember that bug that was sealed away in the Abyss to make sure the lighthouse wasn't turned off?
Also, it looks like there's a giant rib cage right there.
Well, the lighthouse was turned off. I guess that whole living with purpose thing is a crock of shit after all. It seems as though the Sea of Void itself actually convinced this bug to betray his king and turn off the lighthouse. Now I know what you're thinking. Exactly how conscious is the Void? Is the Void able to think for itself?
I don't know, but I do know that us, the Hollow Knight, as begotten from the Void, when we're fighting the Radiance and the Void itself, the Void rises up, right? So what he's talking about is the Void is rising throughout Hallownest. Right, so before the game starts, while, the Hollow Knight, while all the Hollow Knights are being created, the Void might not have even have been as high as it was at that point. But the point that I was going to make was that we fall into the Void during the Radiance boss fight and we die. Like the Void isn't... it. Do we die? Because we can swim through it here. But I assume we die. I don't know if I ever fell into it. Huh.
Can it form strategies? Does it host a podcast? Well, according to this Chozo statue ripoff, the Void is powerful, but not unified. So while it can thrash around at things that come near it, or call out in unison to turn off a light, it's not a single conscious being. Getting back to the Pale King, one could argue that the Void might have played a role in his ultimate demise, and I've argued that viewpoint in the past, but we have to remember that there isn't enough evidence to know for sure. As an expert lawyer and a good friend of mine, Johnny Cochran, once said, "Any evidence that the Void was involved in the Pale King's death is circumstantial. My name is Johnny Cochran." Just above the White Palace,
Misspelled his own name, apparently. That's the joke.
the bugs in the City of Tears weren't faring much better. Even if we ignore the fact that the infection was still around, there were other issues that helped lead to the city's downfall. Due to the gates being sealed, some bugs resorted to cannibalism in order to avoid starvation.
I do remember this room. I don't remember the point of it, though. Yeah, and I guess it would be cannibalism, wouldn't it? Or was it always like that? Like, what did they eat?
And there's also that metric fuckton of corpses lining the walls of the Soul Sanctum. When all was said and done, the only citizen left standing is Eternal Emelita, who just laughs her ass off about it like she's a fucking Dark Souls character. The White Lady ends up in a cocoon deep within the Queen's gardens. She decided to place bindings on herself in order to keep her from spreading her seed. She claims that this is because of the shame she feels in helping the Pale King create the vessels.
Is that true?
But honestly, it's probably just her kink. The White Lady also diminished her power, possibly as a way to keep herself hidden from unwanted visitors.
Ah. That looks... This has to be the DLC. God Slayer or something like that, I don't know.
Outside her cocoon, Dryia stood guard, protecting her queen from the violent traitor mantises. Dryia is eventually killed off by these bugs,
Yep.
which is actually pretty pathetic if you think about it.
Actually, I would almost suspect she died of old age. I mean, who knows, right? Because none of them got inside. So she killed them all and then maybe succumbed to her wounds. Either way. And the glowing tree was obviously whatever her name is, his true form.
I mean, we're talking like the Netgear WPN824N N150 wireless router pathetic. Speaking of great knights dying pathetically, let's move on to Hagamel. Hagamel held the city crest, a key used to open one of the gates to the City of Tears. At some point, Hagamel's armor shell was stolen by a maggot. Now, maggots were generally looked down upon and forced to do menial labor. They were incredibly weak, and basically deserved all of the discrimination they got. But this one maggot decided to turn the tide, so he stole Hagamel's shell so that he could defend his downtrodden brothers. His actions weren't motivated by the infection, but instead was the result of how hierarchical caste systems will always lead to revolution from the working class, and that true freedom can only be achieved blah blah blah, capitalism is bad, subscribe to my Patreon. Ogrim moved to the Royal Waterways and started living in shit, changing his name to Dung Defender. Now,
I mean, I don't think he changed his name, but regardless.
I love wallowing in shit as much as the next guy, but you'd have to really love shit to put up with living with the flukes. The Dung Defender kept an unwavering sense of duty and loyalty to the king, and love for his fellow knights. So much so that he made shit statues of them. How nice. Ogrim acted as the defender of the pipeways, as well as Isma's Grove. A section of the Royal Waterways became filled with acid, and in the middle of it all rests Isma's corpse, which has been overcome by plant life. Isma is likely the one responsible for this acid blight, but we have no idea what happened to her.
Right. I mean, her charm, Isma's tear protects you from acid. But that doesn't quite explain how it's... I assumed the acid was not from her. I assumed it was from Un.
Hornet's whereabouts during this time are fairly mysterious. We know that she departed Deep Nest and didn't return until the events of the game. At some point, she took to guarding Halnest from intruding warriors, as well as the cast-off shell in the Kingdom's Edge. Despite the Kingdom's woes at large, fortunately this fate did not befall one of the fandom's favorite characters. The Menderbugs continued to fix the broken signs and wayposts of Halnest. From a diary entry, we can see that one Menderbug in particular had found himself on the precipice of a long and loving relationship.
Hello again, diary. Not long now until the next Minder Bash. For us stealthy types,
Whoa.
we're a riotous bunch when we get together. And Minderberry kept flashing me that smile. It might be time to muster my courage and act on it.
Yeah.
I love my home and my life, but sharing it with another? Why, that'd be the berry on top.
Greenpath also underwent some changes during this time. The Mosskin were waiting for Un's call, which would bring them back into the dream they were originally born from. But for some reason, Un's strength deteriorated. We don't know why this happened exactly. Was it due to the White Lady claiming part of her kingdom? Was it somehow due to the infection? Some Mosskin believe that Un went into hiding, but it appears as though Un is, in fact, calling to her children. But many of the Mosskin are unable to hear her call.
That actually explains why that Moss Knight is right there. But, I mean, who knows?
Instead, many Mosskin seem to have taken the Radiance's infection into their leaves, which might explain why Greenpath became overgrown with vegetation despite Un's deteriorating powers. Mossy vagabonds even openly chose to forsake Un and worship the Radiance. Another tribe to be screwed over by the Radiance is the Hive, which fell to the infection after the death of their leader, Hive Queen Vespa.
Is the queen dead? I mean, I assumed the queen would not. I figured it was the queen that was going to fight you, but it also makes sense that she wouldn't fight you directly, because, I mean, why would she? Like, if you take her honeybee charm and leave, then the hive still lives, you know? You fought her guardian knight off, you killed that guy, and then she's like, well, all right. Oh, but then again, I mean, I guess she was there in spirit. But I mean, I don't know. I just kind of assumed that was because you couldn't talk to her directly, or it was like a telepathic thing. It's like, I see myself as a hot, you know, a hot 80-pound lady, not a 600-pound lady, you know?
But it appears as though this had little effect on their civilization. The Radiance's hive mind was already familiar to the bees, since the hive probably operated under something similar already. So in other words, the hive probably made out the best in this whole situation. Let's turn our attention back to the moths. After all, it's their god that keeps killing everybody. Well, the moth tribe didn't fare too well actually, as pretty much the entire tribe died out. The only known survivor is the seer. Despite the loss of her tribe, the seer continued to tend to the graves in the resting grounds, while also waiting the arrival of the wielder, a mysterious being that her tribe has dreamt of for a while.
Just, I know we're gonna have to stop here in a minute. If the Radiance was indeed, I still suspect that that the Radiance is almost like the god of everything still. Because the Radiance has spikes on top of its head. It shares similarities with most of the races, if you will. I don't know what that was. Oh, I do know what that is. Okay, never mind. But it has spikes on its head. You'd think if it was just the god of the moths, it would have like the moth antenna, but it doesn't.
In the Kingdom's Edge, the land became covered in ash molting off of the worm's decomposing corpse. The Colosseum of Fools continued to thrive. The Lord Fool passed away at some point, but nobody really seems to notice or even care. The fools inside the Colosseum were infected, but still seem to have maintained control over themselves. It seems possible that these bugs took in the infection willingly, similar to the Traitor Lord and his followers.
I don't think they're infected, to be honest.
This would have given them an edge in combat, similar to using steroids, but without the whole shrinking testicles thing. However, even the Traitor Lord and his followers went mad, so what makes these fools any more special? As for the Pale King's champion, the Pale Lurker, well, she just went the normal kind of insane. There appears to have been another unforeseen event with the Pale King's plan. When the Hollow Knight was originally chosen, the door to the Abyss was sealed, trapping the discarded vessels within. But apparently, some vessels didn't get the memo. Vessel corpses can be found littered throughout the kingdom. There's one in the Ancient Basin, one in Greenpath, and several trapped in Nosk's lair in Deep Nest. Another vessel that escaped from the Abyss is the player character, the Knight. The exact details on how the vessels escaped the Abyss is unclear. There are indications that they might have slipped into Deep Nest through some old passageway, given void influences in part of the area, and all the corpses found in Nosk's lair. At some point, all entrances to Hollownest were closed off, with the old well in Dirtmouth being the only way to sneak back in. Despite this, several people have wormed their way into the kingdom, with few ever returning. Characters like Relic Seeker Lem seemed content to just pillage artifacts from the ruined kingdom, but other bugs seemed interested in something greater. In the Howling Cliffs rests the corpse of a member of the
I didn't even recognize that we switched from Kingdom to Ruin to Visitors to Hallownest. Let's stop because this is going to be, the part where the game actually starts. Yeah, fair enough. We're at like almost an hour into the video, and that's when they start talking about the game. They're as bad as I am as far as rambling. Still, this is great. This is good. I love all this background. Yeah, I disagree with, mossbag on a few different points, but I mean, overall, like I said, I'm having a good time. It's open to interpretation. It's not so cut and dried. I could have sworn the elder said something about people, like, they said something about most people go down below and don't return or something like that. Like, it wasn't just the NPCs that we meet. It's, and you know, all the corpses that we find, I have a feeling, came from elsewhere. And it was like, the impression that I got was that beyond Hallownest, like, there's probably other towns. I don't think it's correct. Correct that that this is the only place where bugs are sane, right? I think it's probably the most important place, right? It's where the Radiance itself is trapped. You know, it's the cradle of civilization, if you will. You know, but it's presumably it's happening everywhere, the infection and stuff. You know, and then it's, I don't know, it's like, oh, demon souls, for example, the kingdom of Boletaria, like, that's the center, and it's like, oh, we need bounty hunters or whatever to defeat the demons. And so everyone goes there, and it's presumably like this. It's like, oh, Hallownest is in trouble. There's bad stuff going there. They need, well, let's, you know, so you get looters and you get treasure hunters and you get whatever, and it's, you know, it's a fallen kingdom. So who knows? But that's, you know, that's just what I've kind of gleaned from it. Whether it's true, who knows? I have no idea. They're about to talk about the Grim Troop, and it sounds like this stuff has happened before. Maybe not necessarily, oh, the Radiance is, you know, like a pale worm creates a kingdom, and then eventually the Radiance wrests control and, you know, kills everyone, or everything goes to shit. Maybe this was the only case where it was successfully sealed away for a time. Don't know. But, you know, Grim Troop has been to other ruined kingdoms, or possibly other areas that have succumbed, or previous versions of Hallownest in other areas that tried to seal the Radiance away but failed. You know, I still think the Radiance is not like the god of modern day, where God is supposed to be good. I think it's either the God of the Old Testament, where, you know, I am a cruel and unforgiving God, and I will punish peoples at the 4th and 5th generation for the sins of the father, right? Or just straight up the devil. But you know, it doesn't have to be clear. That's the greatest thing, is don't specifically, you know, you leave it vague. That way people can talk about it. That way there's discussion. You don't want to be like, no, it's actually this. It's like, no, let people let people fight over it. That's the most interesting thing. The most interesting thing is what people can try and deduce in their own mind, not what you tell them it is. But yeah, that's it for today. We'll end at like 52 minutes, and then next time we'll try and, it is talk about, it's gonna ruin base game endings, Godmaster endings. I will go through all of it. Spoilers, I didn't realize Godmaster was so significant, but there you go. We'll get that then. And then, because I don't know if I'm gonna do the DLC or not. It's for the channel. I feel like I should, but it might be super hard, you know? And I kind of want to move on to other stuff, especially considering, yeah, I think Steam's going to update and lock anyone that doesn't have Windows 10 out. here pretty soon, so who knows. But that is it for today, guys. Thank you guys so much for your time and attention. Really appreciate it. Really hope you enjoyed this video and these videos. What is your guys' unique positive moment for today? For me, it's the fact that Manny was super adorable and wanted to be in my lap and stuff. He likes being pet, but if I'm doing stuff on the computer, he doesn't like that so much. He likes to be in my lap when both hands are petting him. That's the only time he'll really stick around. So that's my unique positive moment. Hopefully your guys is just as good, if not better. Hopefully better, of course. And I hope to see you guys next time. Till then, guys, take care.